So this morning I'm going to talk about the fifth of the Kokun five ranks. It's called Absolute Awakening. And if you recall, the first was shift, the second was submission, the third was awakening, the fourth, collective awakening, we talked about last week. And this is called Absolute Awakening. And I'll read the verse that accompanies this stage or this rank. It says, slightly rearing up the head's horns, even a little is unworthy. A mind set on the quest of Buddhahood is shameful indeed. The far distant, empty kalpa, no one has known it yet. How necessary is it to journey south to visit 53 sages? Well, in this stage, all traces of self and enlightenment vanish. It's complete liberation. Sometimes it's called accomplishment of accomplishment. And in a certain sense, it corresponds with the 10th of the 10 Oxherding pictures, which is called entering the market with open hands. And the verse for the 10th Oxherding picture goes like this. With bare chest and feet, he enters the market. His face is smeared with earth, his head covered with ashes. A huge laugh streams over his cheeks. Without humbling himself to perform miracles or wonders, he suddenly makes the withered trees bloom. He visits drinking places and fish stalls as he pleases, to awaken the drunkards there to themselves. So if you've seen the 10 Oxherding pictures, it depicts Hote, who's sometimes called the Laughing Buddha, and he's a common ornament at Chinese restaurants, with a big belly and his robe open, bearing his chest and his belly. And he has an infectious smile, and he's supposed to bring peace and calm to people. And he carries a sack over his shoulder when he comes into the market. And he gives people what they want. He doesn't give people what they need, according to what he thinks they might need, whatever they want. And he's free to be who he is without constraints or inhibitions. And his mission is to bring insight and happiness to everyone he meets. So his mission is expressed by this verse, which I ran across, and it encapsulates the fifth Kokun rank. If one understands how to meet one's own self and yet remain unknown to the self, the gate to the palace will open wide. Let me read that again. If one understands how to meet one's own self and yet to remain unknown to the self, the gate to the palace will open wide. So this represents your life as it is, not as we think it should be or we want it to be, or we wish it would be, but our life just as it is, but somehow we cannot accept it. But if we go beyond achievement, nothing extra is added or needed. It is just as we are. But of course, the first step is to appreciate where we are right now. And as we appreciate where we are right now, then naturally that opens up the space for all kinds of transformation. So a monk asked Tozan, what is absolute awakening? And Tozan said, nothing shared. It's kind of interesting, nothing shared. So last week, when we talked about collective awakening, and the monk asked Tozan, what is collective awakening? He said, not attaining things. And when he was asked what's absolute awakening, he said nothing shared. Uchiyama Roshi, who lived in the last century, had quite a bit to say about this. He said the true self has nothing to do with others. It's a self that lives totally within itself. The world as experienced is a world which the self alone, you alone can experience. When you're born, your world is born with you, and when you die, so dies the entire world. Your true self includes the entire world you live in. And in this world, there is no possibility of exchange. So, like Tozan said, nothing shared. And Uchiyama Roshi said, there's no possibility of exchange. And then he concludes his thoughts on this by saying, the world is not some entity which exists apart from us. The world is where we function. Likewise, the life of the true self is not some entity apart from our functioning and working. Everything we encounter is our life. So this could sound a bit confusing. Are we completely separate from other people and living in a world that is different from their worlds? Or is everything our life? First, he says each of us is completely alone. And he made this famous expression that's repeated. He said that you can't exchange anything with anyone else, even a fart. I don't know why anyone would want to exchange a fart to begin with, but anyway, that's what he wrote. And I've heard it repeated many times. However, at the end of his statement, he says everything we encounter is our life. So this means we are everyone and everything we encounter. There is no others, and there is no separation between self and others, subject and object, or sense organs and objects of the sense organs. But it seems that Uchiyama Roshi is being contradictory, and I think it's important to clearly see if this is a contradiction. So Shohaku Okamura, who's a teacher in this country from Japan, said, we should quietly think whether this present life and all beings are co-arising, that are co-arising with this life, are together with life or are not together with life. In other words, every being that co-arises with us, are they part of our life or not part of our life? We should also understand that when Tozan said nothing shared, that encompasses both. It's not separate. It encompasses both being together and not being together. Like Uchiyama Roshi said, is that a contradiction? Why can't it be both? Because Dogen, in one of his fascicles, The Total Function of Life and Death, or Zenki, he said, the ultimate goal of Buddhism is detachment from, which means total immersion in life and death. So right there in the same sentence, Dogen says, the ultimate goal is to be detached from and totally immersed in. Can our minds get around that? Are they contradictory? So somehow, our minds want things to be crystal clear and clean, but I think for Dogen that's clear. So let's reflect on the lines of the verse of Tozan. Slightly rearing up the head's horns, even a little is unworthy. Master Nansen, referring to the source of knowledge, said, clearly, if you speak of it, then horns will grow on your head. So slightly rearing up the head's horns, even a little, is unworthy, or even at all. So one of the 10 grave precepts is to realize self and others as one, and not to elevate oneself and blame others. Of course, this stage of the 5 ranks is beyond that kind of thing, but still is worth mentioning, since we all hold on to our notion of self and who we are in order to make ourselves something special. So even if you have some kind of an opening or a glimpse of this empty state, you attach to it and cannot forget it. And the view of self still persists, so you plummet into an ice cave. And this is a Zen sickness. It's particularly important to reflect on your vows at such times when we have these experiences that we attach to in our practice. Because this view of self keeps raising its horns, and you have to be constantly attentive. Yakusan, when challenged by one of his students about why he did things a certain way, said, I'm limping and palsied, ungainly in 100 ways, clumsy in 1,000, yet I go on this way. I'm limping and palsied, ungainly in 100 ways, clumsy in 1,000, yet I go on this way. It's doing the best I can, just like anybody else. No excuses. Reminds me of the story of Maizumi Roshi, my teacher, who was sitting on the front porch at the Zen Center in Los Angeles, and a drunkard came off the street. They have a big sign in front, the Zen Center, and sat next to him on the porch. And he said to Maizumi Roshi, he said, how is it to be enlightened? And Maizumi Roshi looked at him and he said, "It's very depressing." And near the end of his life, Master Joshu said, "Originally, I intended to practice to save others. Who would have suspected that instead I would become an idiot?" This is famous Master Joshu, who gave us the Mu koan, who lived to be 120 years and appears in many of our koans. I don't see any horns being raised in there. So we practice because somehow we feel incomplete. We're not totally satisfied with our life. In our mind, we're trying to gain something or accomplish something. And if we happen to accomplish something, we have to let that go or it becomes another attachment. Yakusan is clumsy and Joshu is an idiot. Which is the true person of Zen? And where does that source of knowledge not reach? Bancho wrote this verse. He said, "Throughout the Dharma realm, all becomes his food." Everything becomes his food, and having no preferences, you can eat anything and be enlightened by anything. And you can liberate everyone, even those with horns. So this line in the verse says, don't even have a trace of self-importance. It's a disgrace to hang on to achievement. The slightest extra bit on top of your head becomes a blemish. So the second line says, a mind set on the quest of Buddhahood is shameful indeed. Well, of course, in the 10 ox-herding pictures, the first of the pictures is searching for the ox. So, sure, we have to search for the ox in order to finally let go of the ox. But this is the fifth stage here. We're talking about the fifth and last stage. He said, a mind set on the quest of Buddhahood is shameful indeed. Master Keizan, the Japanese Zen master in the 13th century, is considered the mother of Soto Zen in Japan, said, don't seek, don't seek for enlightenment. He also said, don't think that enlightenment doesn't exist. So don't seek for it, but don't think it doesn't exist. So it's a shame to seek for enlightenment, but it's also a shame to seek for fame or profit. In a Sangha, whether here or elsewhere, there's always a struggle for position and influence. It can take all kinds of shapes and forms. When I first went to live at the Zen Center of Los Angeles back in the 1970s, I knew I could do things better than anyone else there. I was a great manager and organizer. But Maizumi Roshi and Bernie Glassman held me down. Then I realized that I just wanted to spend my days sitting zazen and pulling weeds in the garden. I was really happy with that. When I realized that, they gave me important positions, and I was disappointed. I had to start serving like Yakusan, palsied and limping. So with position comes responsibility and sometimes abuse from others. The slightest thought of superiority is a shame. Excuse me. The slightest thought of enlightenment is a shame. Why is it a shame? Well, because if we have a thought of what we believe enlightenment to be, that's an impediment. Let it go. I've told you many times when I first started to sit, it was actually in the mid 1960s. And right at that time, that book by Philip Kapleau, The Three Pillars of Zen, was published. And I got the first, one of the books of the first printing. And I read in there an enlightenment experience, which turned out to be the enlightenment experience of Yamada Roshi. And I decided that was so great, that's what I want. So I sat for several years trying to have his experience. It's impossible because there's nothing shared. So the third line says, the far distant empty kalpa, no one has known it yet. A kalpa is a vast amount of time. It's a longer period of time than we can even imagine. So. But there's four kalpas. First, the empty kalpa, and then the kalpa of growth, and the kalpa of dwelling, and the kalpa of decay. And then it becomes the empty kalpa again, and it cycles through them. So if you've never heard how long a kalpa is, there's supposed to be a big block of granite that's a mile on each side. And an angel comes down every 1,000 years and brushes her wings against it. When she wears down this block of granite, that's the time of a kalpa. Okay. So first there's emptiness, and then the growth and dwelling, and then decay. And of course, you've probably heard Buddhist instruction that that's the very nature of our thoughts. They arise, and they persist, and then they decay, and then there's nothing, and then it arises again out of nothing. So this emptiness, when it's empty, no one has known it yet. But these thoughts, they keep arising and then they decay. And you should be able to feel a thought arising with your whole body. When you're riding a bicycle without thinking, your body adjusts to balance itself once you've learned. And if you've practiced, you can feel the thought even before it bursts into your consciousness. You do not have to engage it. And if you don't engage it, it will disappear on its own. That's the nature of thoughts. They arise, they persist, and then they decay. But Master Bangke said, you people try to stop your thoughts of clinging and craving from arising. But then by stopping them, you divide one mind into two. The original clinging thoughts that you were able to stop may have come to an end. but the subsequent thoughts concerned with your stopping them won't ever cease. Well, you might wonder, what do I do to stop them? Just let them come and don't develop them any further. Don't attach to them. Without concerning yourself about whether to stop your rising thoughts or not to stop them. Just don't bother with them. And then there's nothing else they can do but vanish. You can't have an argument with a fence when there's no one there to fight with. Things can't help but simply come to an end of themselves. So that's what we say over and over again. Just don't engage your thoughts when you're meditating. Some people tell me, well, I have these great thoughts when I'm meditating and I don't want to lose them. Well, particularly if you're meditating on your own, you can just have a little pad of paper by the side, write the thought down, and then forget about it. And then you come back and look at it and you say, wow, that wasn't so great after all. Or it might be. So after the kalpa of decay, there's the empty kalpa once again. And Nansen remarked, I always tell others to receive directly, even before the empty kalpa. Receive directly, even before the empty kalpa. Even though you intellectually understand and can explain it thoroughly, it does not compare to personally experiencing it once. Even before a thought arises, see directly. Thoughts continually arise. But even if you pay close attention, you'll be able to perceive gaps between the thoughts. That's the empty kalpa. See, and then prior to the empty kalpa, what is there? Yeah. That's what it says. No one has known it yet. This vast, limitless life that each one of us are living, I don't know it, and you don't know it. What is the mind of not knowing? For a person who strives to control everything around them, it's very scary to not know. But what do we really know when we get down to it? So the fourth line of the verse, the last line, says, how necessary is it to journey south to visit 53 sages? This line refers to the pilgrimage of Sudana, as recounted in the Avatamsaka Sutra. Sudana was a youth from India who was seeking enlightenment. And at the behest of the Bodhisattva Manjushri, Sudana makes a pilgrimage on his quest for enlightenment and studies under 53 good friends, those who direct one towards the way of enlightenment. And in his journey, he visits Avalokiteshvara and the future Buddha Maitreya, among others. And his final master he visits is Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, who teaches Sudana that wisdom only exists for the sake of putting it into practice. It's only good insofar as it benefits all living beings. And do you know what he discovered? That Maitreya Buddha is not the future Buddha after all. See, Maitreya Buddha is the Buddha who's going to come in the future. But he's not the future Buddha after all. So how important is it, or how necessary is it to go on this type of pilgrimage? Well, at this stage, the fifth rank, they're saying, well, the future Buddha is right here. Many years ago, I ran across this comic book called The Silver Surfer. Maybe some of you who are older might remember it. And it was about this surfer who had this silver surfboard, and he could surf the whole universe. He'd just get on a surfboard, and it's like a flying carpet, and it would take him anywhere, but on Earth or outside of Earth. And he was on this quest. He wanted to find his true self. And he went all over the universe and had all of these amazing experiences, that only a comic book writer could imagine. And finally, when he finds his true self, he looks back and his surfboard is resting in the place where he started. Okay. So that's what Siddhana discovered. He journeyed south and visited 53 sages. Well, how necessary is it? Well, that's his karma, that's his path. We all have our paths, and whatever we did contributes to it. But we say you need to practice, and you're always encouraged to find a good teacher and train with her or him. And then you honor your teacher. But when they say when the rabbit is caught, you don't need the trap anymore. You don't have to run after anything. But that's only true after you've caught the rabbit, which is, of course, a metaphor for revealing your true self. There's another way to express it, which we often do. You need a canoe to cross the lake, and the canoe is your practice, and maybe the oar is the guidance of your teachers. And once you get to the other shore, you don't need to carry the canoe with you. Yet you continue on your journey, and your feet might represent your practice, and they're an intimate part of you. So intimate that there is nothing shared. That is what this fifth stage represents. There's no duality. There are no others, so it's not two. There's no self, so it's not one either. It's not one, not two. So what is there? As we say, there's not even a square inch of ground upon which to stand. And this empty kalpa, no one has known it yet.